Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Rehab Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Effort, and today we're going to be covering a question that I got the other day about shoulder external rotation and why it may be limited, and then kind of some things that we could do about it. So it's important to understand that when it comes to shoulder mobility, the rib cage is extremely important. A lot of people will hyperfixate on the shoulder itself, and the shoulder is just a result of other things that are happening. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but inside the rib cage, we have these big lungs, these big inflatable balloons that are going to change the pressure, which is then going to change the shape of the rib cage. So if you take a big breath in, you'll feel how your rib cage expands. When you breathe out, you feel how it compresses. Both of those are going to change the shape of the rib cage. Now, why is that important? We've got the scapula, which are your shoulder blades. Those are going to change position based on that shape of the rib cage. And the thing is the scapula is connected to the shoulder joint. So the socket of the shoulder joint is going to be impacted by where the shoulder blade is. If the shoulder blade is in a specific position, that's going to impact how the humerus or the shoulder bone, the arm bone, can move. So you can see how, again, if we take a step back, we reverse engineer how the shoulder mobility got limited, we can start to appreciate some of the mechanics that go into shoulder mobility. So what tends to happen is somebody has, let me give the internal rotation as an example, because it's such a great example and it's very commonly used, but a lot of people will start to use an exercise called a sleeper stretch. And if you can't visualize or you aren't familiar with it, think about if I'm lying on my right side and my right arm is out in front of me. So I'm laying on the right side, my right arm's out in front of me, and I bend my elbow, and what you'll see is that the hand is going to be facing up towards the ceiling. So my elbow is bent, and then because I'm missing internal rotation, I'm going to take my other hand and try to crank my hand down to the ground to try to force that internal rotation. And it's a very common stretch, still is, which to me is quite surprising. But it still is a very common type of stretch used in order to mobilize the shoulder into internal rotation. The thing is, though, is that, again, if we appreciate the fact that the socket is in a position that doesn't allow for that humerus to internally rotate, well, then we can start to understand why there may be a limitation in the first place. And so the objective is to change the shape of the rib cage to then change the position of the scapula, which allows the shoulder to move. It is a chain reaction effect. So if we're missing shoulder external rotation, think about the people who may have this. Maybe they got shoulder blades that are rounded. Maybe they got shoulder blades that are out towards the side. Maybe they got rib cage with a rib that's flared, right? We have all these different shapes that can account for a limitation in external rotation. In order for the shoulder to externally rotate, the rib cage has to be able to flex. So it has to be able to expand in between the shoulder blades. The reason for that is the shoulder blades are more concave, which means they're dented inwards on the inside, which then means that the rib cage has to be round, so it fits in like a puzzle piece. That will then allow the shoulder blade to move smoothly in its movement as the shoulder moves. So as I raise my arm overhead, the shoulder goes over. The shoulder blade swings up. As I bring my arm down, the shoulder blade swings down towards the spine. So if I have this flat thoracic spine or a lot of tension in between the shoulder blades and this flatness, the scapula is not going to move very well. And in fact, it's going to try to find an area where there is some degree of flexion where it can lock on top of, which is why you see this rounded shoulder, because if the scapula goes up and over the shoulder, it can just rest on top of it, right? The problem with that is that, again, it changes the socket position, which then impedes the ability of the shoulder to move. So think about it. If I round my shoulder, which direction is my socket going to go? Down and out towards the side. If I squeeze my shoulder blades together, where is it going to go? Out to the side and up, or back and up. We have to change the ribcage shape to influence the scapular position to allow for the shoulder to move. So for these people, the main objectives: open up space in between the shoulder blade. Maybe if I've got a limitation in external rotation on one side, I have to turn the rib cage that way. If I have it on both sides, then I need to shift it back in a bilateral way, which is still a rotation, but that's for a different discussion. And so we need to shift the weight back towards the heels, because if we've got tension in between the shoulder blades, we got tension at the back part of the pelvis, so in between the innominate, because they're very similar, if not the same thing. So shifting the weight back towards the heels. Again, if you take a look at my posture program in the first phase, it's all about that. If you take a look at some of my YouTube videos where it talks about the shoulder, and you look at my hook lying low reach with the cable, that's an amazing exercise. You could do backwards walking. You could do crossbody row, where I'm initially pulling the scapula away from the spine, because if I could create space between the spine and the scapula, I'm going to open up that rib cage. I'm going to decompress in between the shoulder blades, which is going to allow me to rotate into that side and improve external rotation. If I can do inversion exercises, right, where my hips are above my head, that is also going to open up in between my shoulder blades. Doing exercises where my reaching is in lower positions, so not at 90, but lower, because that lower reaching position is going to pull the spine back just like a slingshot. And it's going to pull the spine back into the shoulder blades. As an example, doing like a decline press, taking the cables, putting it up to the top and doing a press down. Doing a cable chop to one side with a staggered foot. Doing rolling exercises are a great way and also to get that external rotation on the one side versus the other, and you make it dynamic going back and forth. Right, there are so many different ways in order to restore the shoulder external rotation that doesn't require stretching. I'm not talking about stretching. I'm talking about changing the pressure in my rib cage to change the shape of the rib cage to allow the scapula to be in a better position to move freely, which will allow the shoulder to move better. So if you want a bunch of exercises that help do that, check out my posture program. I'll put the link in the show notes. It has a ton of great solutions. It also talks about posture and the influence of posture on movement limitations. I hope this helped. I hope this gave you some idea of kind of some of the things that we can do about it, some of the reasons why this happens, and again, how we can go about improving it and addressing it while still training. Because again, we want to train. We don't want to just do exercise on the ground, but we want to be able to merge them together into a more effective program. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Keep moving, and I'll see you next time.